Saving Fatherhood is about fathers, mothers, and children. The Saving Fatherhood podcast addresses the current attack on our family. The family as designed by our Heavenly Father, whose image we bear. Join us as we discuss what the Christian response needs to be. And welcome to Saving Fatherhood. I'm your host, Joe Gormley. I'm very grateful that you've come out again on another Sunday night for a live stream where we talk about the wickedness and the evils in family court, among other things. And what does God have to say about it? So tonight's a little bit of a twist, though. Law Center. Oh, Larry, welcome to what's no longer Saving Fatherhood.
Joe, thanks for agreeing to allow me to interview you this evening. I had a little trouble with the audio. Now you're loud and clear, so keep it in the exact setting you have it right now, okay? You had it perfectly a second ago.
I had it perfect.
Right now, perfect. Like that. You have to do it like that.
Okay, well, hopefully it's just my movement around the mic and not the technology itself.
No, you did. You went completely out. But let's not test it. It's fine now. Let's go with how we have it here. So, Joe, I've always been wanting to ask you, why are you passionate about saving fatherhood and the work that you do with your Saving Fatherhood ministry, podcast, and the concept?
Yeah, so in 2017, I started this podcast because I had been going through a divorce for 5 years. I had been my ex had left me in 2012, and during that time, I became an alienated father. Not at that point, I hadn't seen my child in a couple of years, and so I thought this was incredibly unique. That because I'd never heard of it before, that's something you don't hear on the news, and lo and behold, I found out it's extremely common, but most dads don't talk about it. Once it happens to them, they are in shock, embarrassed. They have feelings of guilt because they may have done something wrong that was publicized or expanded upon in a public way, and they just want to move on. There's no forgiveness in the family court. That's the biggest thing.
Sure. And Joe, your comment, extremely common. When something as awful as parental alienation happens, you think you're the only one. But
Mhm.
let's quantify extremely. I think the percentage of overall relationships or overall divorce is relatively low, but so much more common than it should. I believe it's in single digits, but still, the fact that many, I mean, it's several million parents are undergoing parental alienation. So I just want to put in context what we mean by extremely common is this is happening to millions and millions of parents. Fair to say, Joe?
I would disagree, I would agree in the sense that I don't think your research is wrong, and I know you know what you're talking about, and I think the numbers that you're sharing are from either statistics gained by the legal profession, the state, or psychology, and I, it's based on what may be interpreted as a classical definition of parental alienation. I think parental alien, and they say that parental alienation is very hard to do, and they call it a psychological pathogen. As a Christian, however, I'd reject the fact that a psychological pathogen actually exists. I just call it a sin issue, and I think that two people going through a divorce have to purposely try not to alienate the child, as opposed to what psychology would teach would be that this pathogen came about, um, and it's very unique. And if whenever that does show up, it's because the other person, one of the parents, has a narcissistic borderline personality disorder, which I would also reject. So, because of my Christianity. And in fact, one of the things that makes me so passionate about this is I think that any Christian that's put through the rigors of psychological examination in the courtroom is having their First Amendment religious freedom violated if they've been taught well about what the Bible teaches about psychology.
So I would like to just make sure I understand your point. At least the first point that you made is that it's natural that when you have extreme negative emotion going through a painful emotional divorce, that we actually have to make an effort to distance our children from that pain and that maybe natural antagonism that comes from the divorce. And if not, the children are going to be negatively affected in some way. Did I summarize what you were saying accurately?
Absolutely,
All right.
absolutely.
That
It's
fair
a
enough.
harmful, yeah,
We agree there.
yeah.
So, that having been established, tell us about your ministry, the other work that you do with Saving Fatherhood, apart from the podcast, then we'll get to the podcast.
So the podcast was what I started out with, and of course, I interacted with lots of people, a lot of things. I mean, just being an interview show allowed me to ask lots of questions and learn a lot myself, because I obviously didn't understand this parental alienation thing. And I certainly didn't understand it from a biblical worldview, although I was confident there was one, a way to look at it from that angle. And as part of Saving Fatherhood, in the podcast, we got involved in politics, political things, met lots of great people at rallies and protests and marches like the march that you and I met at. And then I've just been able to minister to people in a one-on-one basis, about, trying to help them stay out of the family court. First of all, we try to talk to people. I like to tell people I do defibrillator marriage counseling. So, in other words, I don't hold myself well versed enough as a biblical counselor to do marriage counseling, but I think I can scare the hell out of people and hopefully keep a couple of marriages together, because the reality is, um, when folks have a really high contentious divorce, which I would say all of divorces are contentious, but it gets really ugly, because the government is going to make it really hard for you to have any type of chance to mend that marriage, right? So when people get set, one if one person decides they want to get married, there's no legal way to prevent yourself from getting married because of no fault divorce. So I warn people of that, and I try and scare them off of what can happen to their kids through parental alienation or the other horrible things. So that's really the ministry in a nutshell. And I try to point people to God's word as the way to stay married.
So you're encouraging people to, and we'll talk about this in a bit, enter into a more religious, say that covenant marriage, rather than just the quote unquote government marriage, basically the marriages that are subject to no fault throughout the 50 states. When you say you're giving your ministry, what basically you're doing is encouraging this more religious, this different, safer, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
way of going through. the sanctity of marriage?
Yeah, so I didn't do it tonight because we're technically on your show. So but I usually introduce the show as, hey, we're not about fathers' rights. We're not about mothers' rights. We're about our heavenly Father's right to have dominion over families. And that's the problem. God designed marriage to work a certain way, whether you're a Christian, a Jew, or a Muslim, or Hindu, or something else. It doesn't matter. The Creator got the as the Constitution says, nature's God design marriage to work a certain way. Honestly, I tell people that are not Christian and are marrying people who aren't in their Bible daily, they shouldn't try to get married. It's a waste of time and energy, and they're just going to cause themselves frustration down the road. So that's my honest personal belief. Now, that being said, a lot of people want to get married, right? So, but
Now, sure. Now, you and I have discussed this basically off, through our relationship and knowing each other basically off air. But so practically, what you're saying is that marriage that's subject to no fault laws isn't actually a marriage at all, because when we give a vow
mhm,
to, stay with each other as long as we both shall live, the way the state allows us to get out of that basically nullifies any meaning in that promise, because of no fault divorce. One spouse can unilaterally say, just kidding. Or not just kidding, but I changed my mind for no fault of yours, for
right.
just because I want to. And then you can be subject to economic sanctions and financial hardship, as if you breached the contract when you in fact you did not. uh, is Am I on the right track there, Joe? I lost you. Now I don't know, can you hear me when I say this, because I did lose you, and I'll bet you
I
it'll
hear
come
you.
back.
I
Yeah,
hear
I
you
hear you
fine.
fine. Keep going,
Not a
go ahead.
problem.
But I just for a second.
Again?
Now
Did it
good,
happen again?
go ahead. Let's just
Okay.
hope it doesn't come again.
So, no fault divorce, going back to no fault divorce, that is something that came into play in 1969 for the first time in California, and it has ripped apart our families. And for a Christian, the covenant
And real
component is
quick, of course,
presumed.
if I could, it spread to the whole 50 states. So New York was the last to hold out. So now what started in California basically exists in every state of our country, some form actually similar to the original one that Ronald Reagan passed in California. It's now the law of the land. And that's what ripped us all apart.
Well, I hate that phrase, "the law of the land." It makes no sense to me. So no fault divorce actually passed as legislation in various parts of the country, a little bit differently than, say, like Troxel, Granville, which didn't spread at all after a Supreme Court decision, or say Obergefell, which did spread everywhere, or Roe v. Wade, which did spread everywhere. So, it's a little bit apples and oranges, but I think what you're to your point, yeah, did spread by because I think other states.
It was passed by every legislature
Correct,
in the country.
correct,
Okay,
correct.
that's the point that I was making. Keep going, Joe,
Well,
please.
and but in 3 states, there is a covenant marriage, amendment, or to their or something that they put in addition to no fault divorce. So, all these states have a no fault option, every one of them. 3 states, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Arizona, have a covenant marriage option. So, the covenant marriage is one that was traditional and normative since history has been recorded. It's always been presumed that a marriage was a covenant. If someone was to violate the marriage or destroy that covenant, it was a serious offense, and that person was held liable or hurt or harmed by the destruction. It's now quite the opposite. We have people who don't want to get divorced that are forced into divorce, and they are the ones that pay the penalty. And our government, frankly, motivates that in a lot of different ways.
So let's talk about this covenant marriage. through my research, statistically, it seems like actually a very small percentage of people take in those 3 states, Louisiana, Nevada,
No,
and
Louisiana, Arkansas, and Arizona.
Arkansas, and Arizona. It's actually a very small fraction, like, at or about 1%. And I wonder, I don't know if you know, but to me, it seems like because of an unawareness. I mean, gosh, I would have done something like this if I lived in one of those 3 states. Because my wife and I, like you, are also religious. And so that we don't want an option to get out. And if one
Right.
of us does, God, we would love to have been bound by both of us bound by. That is what really actually what a covenant marriage does, is it actually makes your vows actually what they are. That you
Yeah.
really need a reason and not a unilateral, irretrievable breakdown, but some type of fault. And they're really extreme. They're substance abuse and some type of rehabilitation needed, or persistent substance abuse, uh, being jailed for extreme long time. Then other ones are what, cruelty, abuse, and two other really, one of those real exceptional circumstances. But it's not just someone saying, "Hey, a marriage is irretrievably broke down. I'm out." That's
So
not one of them.
yeah.
Oh,
So in my
abandonment, that was the 4th. The 5th, I don't know if you would know off the
no,
top of
there's
your head.
well in Louisiana where I got my covenant marriage, um, my second marriage. There's four, right? So
Okay,
two of them are from the Bible. So Jesus says if there's sexual infidelity, you can get a divorce. Paul clarifies that in First Corinthians 7 and says if your unbelieving spouse has left you, you are free. So we add abandonment, and abandonment's the second thing that Louisiana has in their covenant marriage option. Um, the third thing, actually, they only have three. The third thing they add is well, abuse comes under abandonment. It's assumed that like if there's some kind of physical or spiritual abuse, some would say mental abuse, that would constitute abandoning the marriage. So they
alright.
have
So
those.
they're all these other ones are subsets of some of
And
those
they're all,
main
yeah, they're
ones.
really they really are all subsets. The other type of abandonment is if you're in prison. So if you're in prison,
Sure.
you've abandoned the marriage
Yeah, and I
by
think mental illness is spelled out somewhere too, but I guess that could also be a subset of abandonment if someone abandons through
Not in the
insanity.
Louisiana one. Not in the
Okay,
Louisiana one. I don't think so. So that and you know, I hey, you got to know this. This is the crazy thing. You go in and everybody has almost very similar vows, right? For in good times and in bad. Some say, you know,
sickness
in
and health.
sickness and in health, for
Sure.
rich or for poor. So you can't if psychological illness is a medical thing, you certainly can't exempt that. But I guess you can. You can do whatever you want in the law sometimes. But so in Louisiana, anyway, I will tell you why I think, but just from my own personal experience, why it's so small is they do everything to talk you out of it as you go through the process.
Yeah.
They really do. I mean, because you know, I had to go. So, and I may, and you, it's very difficult to come from out of state and do it. So there are requirements for training with your pastor that's going to do the marriage ceremony. So if you don't live in Louisiana, like we live in New Jersey, so we had our pastor train us, but then we flew him down to Louisiana so he could go in front of the uh, the license department and the notary public. So we had to have our documents all notarized, and the pastor that did the training had to be there for that, and had to be with a Louisiana notary. So yeah, and then when we went through that process, they kept telling us, "Are you sure this is what you want? You know, this is like permanent." We're like, "Yeah, we do."
Who asked you that?
Oh, just the various clerks, multiple clerks that we dealt with in the marriage office in
Gee, the
Louisiana.
idea of passing a law like that isn't trying to talk. Well, actually,
Well, there's a lot of pushback from other people who say that this covenant marriage license somehow makes their marriage less valuable. And well, okay,
certainly not the covenant marriage that does that. It's the no fault divorce that does that.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly, right. That's like, man, that's I don't know. That's
So,
like getting mad at cancer for because your cigarettes don't taste as good.
sure. So let me ask you, if this is Have you done any research, investigation, or even anecdotally, Joe? How come this hasn't been picked up in other states? Do you think, or even the
Um,
option, even this option?
yeah, I mentioned it to a couple of legislators that I met through FanPack, through talking to them about some people that were supporters of our shared parenting bills that have gone nowhere, and they said, "Wow, that's a great idea. That's wonderful." But I think most of there's not an appetite for it in divorce circles because everyone thinks they should be able to have a good divorce. Like there's something that's a good like there's a thing that should be a good divorce.
I heard about that.
Oxymoron.
The oxymoron, sure,
But
sure.
everybody thinks that, yeah, we should have a good divorce and
There's certainly the difference between, like, really awful and civil, high conflict and low conflict, but separating when you have children is really never easy and never, as you say, good. And, so
well, the Christian perspective is if the unbelieving spouse wants to stay, you should do everything in your power to keep them there. And Romans also teaches us that it is our responsibility to make peace at all times when it is up to us. But if the unbelieving spouse leaves, you're free. So that would be the biblical perspective. And I think that if you have children, you really are entering into a covenant. Come on. And the term covenant should reflect the responsibility that you have. We're not big on responsibility anymore. It's part of the problem, I think.
so you don't have this in New Jersey, like I don't have it in Pennsylvania. It's only those 3 states that we mentioned. So what you did
Mhm.
was you got, as you said, you flew over to Louisiana, got married there, and also incorporated it into a prenup. And
Yes.
you were advised that it might not the lawyer who drew your paperwork actually did not commit to it working, correct?
That is correct, but we felt that to have a marriage that actually honored God, we could not enter into what is basically a violation of the commandment that says not to lie. I think it's a lie to go and make a commitment at the altar that is completely negated by documents you sign a few minutes later. Now, in a lot of cases, in most of the cases, when I share this information with people who love each other and never have any intention of getting divorced, they say to themselves, they say, "What do you mean? How is it different? Why would they negate what you said at the altar?" And I explained to them, it's that no fault divorce thing. I mean, the fact of the matter is, none of the commitments you make at the altar are enforceable. And when the term covenant actually in the old Hebrew means to cut, and a lot you may be familiar with the idiom to cut a contract. That's where that comes from. When you cut a contract, it's referring back to Abraham and God making the first covenant after Genesis 3. The first covenant that after the fall, and what happened was God cut a bull, a dove, and a ram, and his Holy Spirit goes through there to say, if I break this covenant, let me be broken like these animals. We're supposed to be broken if we enter into a divorce or if we cause a divorce. The problem is we don't enforce that anymore. In fact, it's the opposite. You can get a divorce with no penalty and you can get paid for it.
So I'm surprised then that so you speak to legislatures and they say, "Hey, good idea," but of course, no one wants to do it because I guess the status quo is so lucrative. So, do you recommend this for your viewers and for other young folk who are getting married?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, like we talked about before, yeah, I don't know if my prenup is enforceable or not. There's a whole bunch of religious freedom things in there, but again, the family courts don't care too much about religious freedom. It should be covered under Article 6, or it should be covered under the contracts clause. The government has a right to enforce contracts, but you have that license thing in the way, and you did sign, there's a license. So the state still has the right to move that. The other part is I get married in Louisiana, so if I go back to, and this is what I got to explain to the listeners, I don't think we explained this. If I move back to New Jersey and say my spouse wants to get a divorce, New Jersey is going to say that's our jurisdiction. And in fact, they want that jurisdiction because they get credit for it at the federal level, which we don't have to get into because that makes it more confusing. But they want it, and they do want that jurisdiction. So what my prenup says, first, it goes through and explains why covenant's so important as a Christian over and over again, all the different covenants from from the Adamic covenant to the final covenant with Jesus and all the covenants in between. But so we explain that, and then it says if someone in our marriage decides to get a divorce, they have to move to Louisiana, live there for a year, so that Louisiana law will be what it adjudicates the divorce. And if a judge finds that to be too onerous, then Louisiana law will still be enforced. So if a New Jersey judge wants to take it, he has to look up New Jersey law.
Look up Louisiana law, but I know what you meant.
Correct.
Got you.
Correct.
And that's
Yeah.
because you want your covenant marriage. You both are committing to abide by the laws that we just discussed there.
And we don't want to be liars. I mean, literally, we have an obligation. I mean, at least in every church is different. So I don't know how your church looks at it, but it's not just that you lie, but if you believe a lie, if you accept a lie and don't confront a lie, you're violating that commandment.
So, Joe, really what you're saying is that the fact that we as a society have adopted something called no fault divorce, what we're doing is we're completely spiritually and functionally and practically undermining the institution of marriage uh, in our society, which is why you have said a license to marriage should be abolished. It means nothing. Everything should be the covenant marriage. Is that right?
Absolutely, and I have a plan that I think will work to get rid of that marriage license. I do think that the marriage license is the kingpin in the bowling lane. You knock down that pin, you knock down everything else. And I think the way to do it is nullification. We get marriage nullified at either the sheriff's office or the local mayor. You just defund it. You stop paying for it, and then people have to go out and get their own contracts or covenants or whatever they want and see if we can get that enforced.
I don't understand what you mean. You're saying get it nullified, defund it. So what you're saying is starve the courts from really what you're asking. Aren't you really and functionally asking the country or all the jurisdictions really just to adopt a covenant marriage and really abolish no fault divorce?
Absolutely. I think no fault divorce is a constitutionally untenable position. It is a violation of the freedom of religion. There's no way it can stand up. There's no pastor that's going to want it. There's no priest that's going to want it. There's no imam or rabbi that's going to want it. It's a violation of all those religions. Now, some of them might say, well, I'm fine with it. And they may be a member of a church. But if you look at the doctrine of any of those religions, they're all Abrahamic religions, remember? And Abraham is where we get the term covenant, to cut a contract. And so all those religions hold to that. None of them can sit by and say that this is in line with their religion. And it's a violation of religious freedom, period.
Joe, I'm good with our discussion on this. I was going to ask you about some of the what type of guests that you have on your podcast. I wanted to give you an opportunity to say anything closing on the covenant issue before I ask you that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't want to, sure, I just don't want to jump off the topic and
Okay.
ask you about your podcast unless you've covered everything you wanted to say
Well,
about the covenant marriage.
yeah, I think, so covenant marriage, marriage is covenant, covenant is marriage. You may not be aware if you've ever heard of a thing called the Old Testament, New Testament. Testament means covenant. It's the same thing. You don't have a relationship with God without covenant, right? So, and that's super critical if you're a Christian, if you're a Jew, or if you're a Muslim, any of those. I'm not really familiar that much with Hindi but that's not an Abrahamic religion. But I would tell you that the Hindu people I've talked to, they have a big problem with no fault divorce as well. So I
Right.
know I have some friends there. So everyone hates it. It's really a product of feminism, which is just it's just feminism hates women, in my personal opinion. I hate the whole idea that people. I've had feminists
And
tell me,
then
"Hey,
feminism hates women, is that what you said?
absolutely. It hates
Okay.
the idea of a woman." I mean, see, just look at the other things in our culture that I won't mention because I don't want to hurt your YouTube ratings. You
Well,
know,
I don't wanna go down that slippery slope either.
yeah, yeah. So, but the thing is, but the fact is, the culture's being taught things like you can't say you're for saving fatherhood because that's anti-mother. When that's nothing further from the truth. In fact, I believe that these feminists don't like motherhood. They tell young girls not to that motherhood is not it's a okay side gig, but it's not worthy of a full-time career, you know? I mean, we're promoting less babies and things like that too. So it's just horrible. So anyway, there's and people are free to and I love that people can be free to disagree with me on that. And that's all I want is I want to be free to have a marriage that reflects my religious values. And I do actually. I think I have a pretty close. It could be better than what I have because I still have a marriage license with Louisiana that points back to New Jersey, and I'd like to get rid of that.
Sure, Joe, we're somewhat jointly broadcasting, you on Saving Fatherhood, me on the Law Center. I don't wanna go down that, the path about the feminist discussion, but you made it let me just go back to the, um, covenant part that, my understanding is that the whole idea of the covenant marriage has a strong, if not sole, Christian influence. This was somewhat of a religious sponsored law. However, as you put, it's meant for it doesn't necessarily have to be only something that's celebrated by Christians, but it really works for any religion because all religions have religious marriages or they get married in their own um, religious institution or organization so that you would recommend it for everyone.
It's also great for the secular humanist and anyone who would call themselves an atheist. Look, we need to protect the First Amendment for especially for the atheist. The atheist was the most throughout history, there were plenty of atheists, but they were never able to share any of their thoughts or ideas in countries where there wasn't freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is very unique in our country and in history because it's freedom of thought, it's freedom of ideas. And if you're an atheist, you need to protect freedom of religion and you do that by protecting things like covenant marriage, which is very religious. But if you want to have a something that reflects the idea of marriage since the dawn of history, so that's what you need. It needs to get rid of that no fault component because kids aren't getting married anymore, Larry. You know this. Kids are not getting married. We're not. They're not. We're not even replacing ourselves because we're not having getting married. We're not having kids, right? So we need immigration in order to keep our numbers up high enough. Because we don't do the 2.2 children per female that's required in order to replace ourselves. So marriage is a good thing. Marriage has always been considered a good thing for the country, for the culture, for keeping, hey, keeping men and women um, in strong, stable relationships that allow them all the statistics show that if you're married, you do better financially, you do better emotionally, you do better in every way, and so do the kids.
Joe, if I could now switch to if I could ask you now about your podcast, tell me about some of the guests that you have and what topics you cover on the podcast.
So, I have over the years had politicians, psychologists, various people who have been traumatized by the family court, and it's a mix of people who just care about making changes in the family court, and we really have focused on trying to let people know that the family court just destroys families. Um, and we want that to change. We want people to recognize that. We want people to even know that no fault divorce, that their marriage is susceptible to that. You know, a lot of people got married before no fault divorce went into place in their state, and then they find out later, oh, they changed the laws. And that's the problem with a license versus a covenant. A covenant's forever. A license is a unilateral contract with the state. And the state can change it at any time, and they do all the time. So you really don't know what you have committed to. And it's such a huge part of your life, right? To have that ripped away from you, to have, you make plans for a 30-year mortgage, and we're putting away for the kids' education. I mean, these are decades we're planning out in advance. And then all of a sudden, it takes two people to get married and one person to get divorced. So this is what we talk about all the time. We talk about the upcoming events. We talk about shared parenting. We talk about child protective services and all the abuses of the government in families. I'm a firm believer that God established four realms of authority. The first is the realm of the self. The second is the family. The third is the church, and the fourth is the government. And the Bible speaks clearly as to the rights and responsibilities of those four realms. And all of our laws in America are based on those four realms. We just don't follow our laws anymore.
So, in terms of custody, would you like to see? Are you a shared parenting proponent?
Absolutely. I have been a shared parenting proponent. Unfortunately, it's been pushed back on over and over again. In New Jersey, our biggest, we have two big groups that push back on us. One's the Bar Association, and the other is feminists that think that men are responsible for violence against women. However, as I saw on the lawcenter.net, the truth is it's actually men who are more physical, are victims of physical abuse more than women. So that's another misrepresentation, we'll call it.
Um, Yeah, I sure what you're talking about are two videos that I produced. One particular against or about the Violence Against Women Act that cited it was a report by the Coalition Against Domestic Violence that and statistical research that showed that I don't know if they specified physical abuse. I think that they did now that you think about it, but also it seems like men are slightly more statistic victims of parental alienation, which is a form of abuse not only against an intimate partner but also against the children. So, Joe, you mentioned covenant marriage, that you want to abolish no fault, and that you want to adopt covenant marriage. You're pro uh, shared parenting. Any other reforms? You were so good as to have me and allow me to present my five issues to the two main ones, with some subtopics being increased transparency and accountability for the judiciary. How about yourself? Are you a proponent of anything else other than those two major ones that we just discussed, covenant and shared parenting?
Yeah, well, so it's sort of funny right now with well, I almost mentioned something else that might not be good for YouTube for your
Yeah, that's
show. I'm
you
gonna
know,
hold back. But
speak
let
f no, speak freely. Listen, it's your interview.
well, I mean,
Thank you for trying to edit, but, go ahead.
it's hot in the news right now is the pending opinions from the Supreme Court regarding Roe v. Wade. One of the things that
We can pivot if you want. Go ahead. Go ahead.
so one of the things that is going on there is the pro life groups. You might not be aware of this. The pro life groups that have been working against Roe v. Wade for 50 years are complaining at some legislation that happens to be in Louisiana, that would eliminate that would get rid of all their work, like things like a a waiting period for a notification of a waiting period before you get an abortion. Well,
You're gonna
if
make
if
abortion
they
illegal, you don't need a waiting period then.
exactly, and that's how I feel about the family court. If we can get rid of the marriage license and that kingpin goes down, all these other things go away. All the necessity for all these things go away. Now, you're gonna have some need for this, but I believe it should all be constitutionally in the civil court. I don't think there's any reason for a family court. We should reduce that. There's no way you're going to tell me.
If one of our commenters can also comment, if when I don't hear Joe, do you also not hear him too? I'd really like to know that. You just went back on. Go ahead. You went back off again. You took a breath. I heard your
How
breath.
about that? How about that?
Now
Now?
you're back.
Okay. There's something wrong with my wife. So, these yeah, so pro jury, pro Cameron hearings. Yeah, put it back in the civil court. If my child is not worth $20 in 1789 dollars, then I don't get a jury. But my child sure as heck better be, because before COVID, that's only about $600. So and it's only about 2 hours of attorney time,
So
right?
look, I love in concept or in theory, a jury is a better thing, but it's a practical impossibility. It will completely clog and shut down the courts. So I mean, look, as a scholar, it's interesting to say, look, if you take away power from one individual, you're going to have a better finding of fact. I get that, and let me acknowledge that. However, I think it's a practical nightmare, and I like the in-camera hearings. Um, uh,
If you get rid of no fault, again, it's pointless to even argue it or debate it, because if you get rid of no fault divorce, you're not going to need those juries except in the most extreme
oh,
egregious
I prefer those
circumstances.
too. No, yeah, if you get rid of no fault, I actually agree with that.
Yeah,
But
because you wouldn't have, so 80% of all marriages are the woman's filing, and the man does not want. There's eight. Well, I should say it this way, so it's not sexist or doesn't even refer to gender. 80% of the time, the person filing for divorce, the other person doesn't want a divorce.
yeah,
That's
I
huge.
mean, I just want to acknowledge any women who are watching my channel that women will say, but wait a minute, women have to leave to flee abuse from an abuser who may want to try to be compelling the woman to stay. So let me just acknowledge that viewpoint. And that's why I want to try and keep this more gender neutral, because every concept that you're talking about still works for both genders. Men often want to end marriages, or it does happen that a woman can be betrayed by an unfaithful a male, or things like that. So um, it was work for both genders, right? Is my point.
Well, absolutely. That's why I backpedaled a little bit in how I phrased that, because the more important thing versus the male female thing, and I think that women have been abused by feminists, and those were all white men when they passed certain legislation.
So
So
one thing that I want to add, and I want to acknowledge our Facebook user for participating and giving us some interaction and feedback, but something a positive development that I see, and Joe, you were also so good as to have me on a show to talk about alternatives to alternative remedies for parental alienation other than a custody battle, which are civil trials. Some issues, something that's not a forced or false punishment for lying. Courts don't enforce any penalty for abusive process, false PFAs, or
mhm,
false
mhm,
accusations of domestic abuse. And Joe, you had me on the show to talk about alternative remedies, and
mhm,
we're in the news at the time of our recording right here on the streaming, that the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case is a perfect example of exactly what that show was. And some celebrity cases can cause both negative and positive um, effects on our courts, and I believe that this one will have an enormous positive effect because it's going to give lawyers and litigants the idea and an example of how it can work. Of course, we don't have a verdict, but if you're following the news, it looks like the Depp has exposed Amber Heard as someone who has abused, has made false allegations and abused the system and used it as a weapon against him, which is what I really think, some of the statistics are referring to when you talk about men as victims. That's how I see men being victims. What Johnny Depp is showing an example of her trying to get him to hit her, and apparently Depp had some discipline, but most or a lot of men aren't or don't restrain themselves, and then get have negative ramifications. But anyway, if false allegations are enforced, or if victims enforce their rights and learn how to do that, you could have some more of a balance or more justice in family court.
Yeah, unfortunately, I met you too late. I had a couple. I could have done that both in my cases as well, but I ran out of time, um, to go back and get those adjudicated. But the problem is really, you just it's not men versus women or colors or other races or other things. It's all about there's the hyper complexity of these laws, causing new courts to be found, and oh, we're too busy to have juries. Guess what? You can't be poor and get justice. You just can't. If you're Johnny Depp and you've got millions and millions of dollars to throw away, sure,
Well,
you
I
can
have to
get
tell you
justice.
something about Depp. Depp suffered tens of millions of dollars because the defamation against him was in the newspapers. My understanding is he got dropped and labeled as an abuser. So look, in civil court, first of all, well, let me stay on this. Joe, and I want to address you. And you said you found this idea too late. I actually think that it's best used as a deterrent, because if you raise the defamation in in that court, or if you file at the same time your divorce is going on, then I believe those claims are best used as a deterrent
Well,
or a
everybody
second.
needs a deterrent in family court because family court's for life,
So yeah, I don't
especially the high
necessarily.
contentious ones that
It,
keep coming at you.
Sure, and I don't think it should be filed without, you have an asset to attach, the divorce
Yeah,
judgment.
yeah.
So, if you file and somehow get them consolidated and get a second hearing from a different, but or bifurcated, but at the same time they both can get joined, you can use it as a judgment and the deposition transcripts as leverage in family court, or when you don't, if a judge isn't permitting discovery, you have another forum and deposition transcripts to copy and show the judge because they're under oath and at the same parties. So I believe it can be leveraged in a settlement most efficiently, rather than just something for wealthy people to sue and attach on multi million dollar homes. So but I wouldn't want any of our viewers to think, or listeners as the podcast, I wouldn't anyone listening to think, oh, I can get, necessarily money. I think it's leverage. I think it's a deterrent. And I think it's another way to ensure your voice is heard if a family court has too streamlined a system. So,
So
and
this little comment speaks a little bit to that. This person is saying trials are only 2 to 3% of family courts, and that's something we hear from the bar association when they tell us that we're just wasting our time. There's not enough high contentious divorces out there. But the fact of the matter is, most people just run out of money before they get there, so they're
well,
forced to settle.
sure, and trials are only 2 to 3% of family court. First of all, let me just I don't necessarily know that statistics. I really can't address that, but I do want to say that family court is a civil court. It's a court of equity within civil court where you get removed from the jury trial system. So just for our semantics and how we're using it, I think people are saying it shouldn't be removed or it shouldn't just be a court of equity. But the problem is that civil court can't non-equity court can't order something called specific performance. It can't compel behavior. It's only dealing with dollars and cents. So that's why they're separated. So and if you just what you're suggesting is that when you have an issue of fact, you don't have a judge who does that. You want to give issues of fact to juries, and I just think that there's just too many, and so that you need too many jury trials or to have it in too many issues, and I don't see it
Larry,
being practical.
I'm concerned for our court system in toto, because the problem we have in so many of these other areas, which we don't need to discuss at all, is that people are learning that we don't follow our own laws. The family court violates all 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights. Every one of them, every part of them, all five freedoms in the First Amendment are violated in the family court. There's not one they don't violate. I used to tell people jokingly that they don't violate the Third Amendment because I've never seen a family court put troops in someone's home. But then someone else reminded me that, oh, no, that's not true, Joe. They do. It's called a guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem is assigned by the courts because they've determined that you no longer represent the best interest of your child. Neither does your spouse. So we're going to have someone sit in your home, document what you do in your family, what it looks like, so that they can come back and represent your child for you. And oh, by the way, you're going to pay for it. So
No, sure. Look, it's definitely not a perfect system, but yeah, to say the least. Well, but look, I mean,
it's not
you
even close. It's
hold
a
on, you have to
violation
have but
of
listen,
God's law.
before you abolish something, you have to have an alternative before you just throw it out, and I do think that to have trials only on true issues of fault and then have a corresponding financial penalty
Mhm.
against the person who is at fault. I get that, I like that, I'm a proponent of that. But,
Yeah,
I'm just not a proponent of the jury thing. I don't think it works. I just think the way you get what you're losing there is through
yeah.
transparency and accountability, and I believe that's the best the system can do,
Well,
and so long.
my point is it's not accountability, yes. Authority is more important in a society that bases their society. There's people out there that say that the United States has never been a society of laws. We're a society of political will. That is so dangerous. We need to be a society of laws where we can faithfully execute laws. If the jury if the jury should not be in family court, we need an amendment to the Constitution that needs to be passed and agreed upon. And but right now, if according to the Constitution, if your matter is worth a certain dollar amount, you're supposed to have a jury. I mean, that's the law, Larry.
Um, yeah. Look, no, well, hold on. Well,
Yeah,
what you did well, first of all, you made a point, let me address it. You said that
sure.
it violates the Constitution, and what you had is you had I mean technically, it does. Like, the challenges are real to say that there's a violation here, but what you had is you had the courts, you had all 3 branches of governments all want to enact the court system as it sits, and then all constitutional challenges were denied. So, I mean, you have, like you said, and that's your point, to your point, so there's a political will to have these constitutional violations because people don't wanna stay together. I mean, the truth of the matter is that most or half, a little bit more than half, or no, 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce. So there's that's the point. There's such a political will to have, not only divorce, Joe, but no fault divorce.
Right. Well,
Because the things that
that's
we're
exactly
talking
the
about are
point.
almost pie in the sky. There's not a political will for this to happen.
Well, and it had, we have become a post-Christian culture,
Sure.
and we've been in the secular humanist has been considered the neutral position, which
So
it's anything but neutral.
I have to add to that, that now we have a lot more religions and a lot more ethnicities and diversity in the country. The minority, it's the whites are a shrinking Christians and whites are a shrinking percentage of the country,
Right.
and we're proud. Our country is proud of being this melting pot. So and we have a separation of church and state. notwithstanding all the religious influence and multi-religious influences
Yeah.
related to marriage.
Yeah.
So it's but it's a good
But you have
academic
to have a
discussion.
plan. You can't just run through life without a plan. You can't run through government without a plan. You can't let the tail wag the dog. And if we don't have an agreement on what is commonly held to be moral and immoral, we are not going to have a country anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, I also want to say, Joe, that we actually do agree
Oh, I know.
we agree with that our country and our court laws would be better with uh, um, the going back. I believe going back to the pre-fault system actually would be positive for the courts and for the American family. We agree on there.
Mhm.
However, that having been said, we have an experiment in 3 states where they adopted the way that you and I wanted to, and only 1% of the public has chosen that. And I believe that the detractors would point to that and say, look, there isn't a will for this. We got to keep it the way that we have it. And gosh, I wonder if it's a matter of ignorance. And that's why only 1% does, not because it wouldn't be more popular if it were more available.
Well, you certainly didn't hear about it in major media, but you didn't hear about no fault divorce either, right? So no fault divorce passed without any national debate. So these 3 states have passed these things without much hoopla. I mean, even in Christian circles, So unless you're from Louisiana, very few people I've talked to, right? So, and but that doesn't make it right or wrong.
Sure. Joe, your camera, I got the gist of what you just said. Your camera did go in and out. It might just be a connection issue. But so look, like again, just in conclusion, I do think that we agree. We see eye to eye here. Although I do think it's an academic discussion, I do believe that we as a society should promote stricter. I don't know. I guess we just have a battle ahead of us, and it's something worth fighting for. It would improve our families if young people were encouraged to at the very least, follow the pre-marriage classes that the covenant marriage demands that people get before they enter into such a serious um, commitment. Joe, I want to leave it there because I believe we're out of time. I want to give you that word. I want to give you the last word, and I want to thank you for being a guest or having me on your show as well.
All right. Well, the one thing that I think you dove into a little bit, I sent you my premarital agreement, my prenup,
That
and
wasn't for me to make public, of course. I
well,
just generally it's
actually
something
I've got
I
it teed up and can show it. I'm very proud of it. I think it was a beautifully
no, I
written
think it is
document.
too. I mean, again, I do think we're out of time, but go ahead, last word.
My question is, can the prenup stand? Can it stand? Can it protect people? And my attorney that I worked with said, "We'll only know when a judge sees it,"
And
which
in your
hopefully no one
case,
ever
I'm
does. In
sure
my case, it won't happen.
I was just gonna say, in your case, we're not gonna get there, but I think it would because the problem it's enforceable as a prenup, but a problem is prenups are somewhat easy to challenge. There's so many ways, like, they're not always enforced, so
Mhm,
that's your issue. It can be
mhm.
challenged just like any other. It's only as strong as the concept of a prenup, and when you do in a contract that's actually contrary to the law is written, the problem is it's not airtight. Judges always have discretion. And whether, I guess the question is, what would the superior court do with it? That's even a better question than what would a judge do with it. And yet, once you're in an appeal on a divorce case, you're already spending more on lawyers than you would be in the division of assets or the fact that you didn't go through anyway. So you're already losing. And so, and again, it's a practical issue.
Yeah, I had a $30,000 transcript that was required by
See?
the appellate court in New
Right.
Jersey, so
And for most of the public, their divorce might not necessarily be worth 30,000. Of course, that's what they're paying attorneys
and the
anyway.
judge and the opposing attorney laughed at me. They're like, because I was pro se. He's not going to go pay for that transcript. I
Sure.
didn't know what they were talking about at the time,
Right.
but it's kind of how it is. So stay out of family court. Savingfatherhood.org. If anybody's thinking about going to family court, let me know. I'd love to talk to you, help you.
Joe, thanks for having me on.
Thank you. We're gonna end. We'll go back to. We'll flip the page and go back, and I'll do the outro for the video.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, everybody.
Saving Fatherhood is about fathers, mothers, and children. The Saving Fatherhood podcast addresses the current attack on our family. The family as designed by our Heavenly Father, whose image we bear. Join us as we discuss what the Christian response needs to be.